Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. Wolves have sacked their manager, Vitor Pereira. With no win so far this season and just 2 points on the board, all signs are leading to relegation. So, who can save them? Yeah, here for this one, we've got Matt Slater. We've also got long-suffering Wolves supporter Tim Spiers. And we've also got David Ornstein as well. All right, David, let's start with you because you've been following this story closely. Are Wolves close to finding a successor to Vitor Pereira?
Well, I think they wanted to give Vitor Pereira as long as possible, and therefore they didn't start a process to replace him before he was actually sacked. Once he was, the work began in earnest, or maybe Saturday night after the Fulham defeat into Sunday, phone calls were starting to be made to express an interest in a number of candidates, including Gary O'Neill, to try and set up conversations. And they moved pretty swiftly in terms of O'Neill discussions, which we reported on The Athletic were advancing. In terms of Rob Edwards, who we revealed too, being in the mix. People like Michael Carrick were admired, and other names were coming out in different sections of the media. We also pointed to Erik ten Hag being somebody that Wolves had expressed an interest in talking to, and he had been discussed internally. So that gave them a number of options. There would have been more as well. But I think it was quite clear they were honing in towards O'Neill without closing the door to others. And they were running the sort of process and conversations with alternative options in parallel to O'Neill. And we don't know the exact ins and outs of it. A lot was sort of said in the public, and only those inside and Gary O'Neill himself know why. But we broke the news on Monday evening that Gary O'Neill had withdrawn himself from the process after these negotiations, and that he felt that this opportunity just wasn't right for him at this moment in time. And I suspect that came as a bit of a shock or setback internally to the Wolves hierarchy, given where they appeared to be with him. However, the show must go on, and they're going to have to find somebody at some point. As the days and hours tick by, you think perhaps the interim coaching team will have a greater chance of leading Wolves against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge this weekend, and then perhaps the international break provides a more calm opportunity to install somebody who, between now and Chelsea, probably has quite limited effect anyway. You often see new appointments sitting in the stands initially rather than taking charge, and use that international break to try and bring someone in, settle them, and let them work with the players that are there and those that then come back ahead of an absolutely critical run of fixtures. No doubt, the Rob Edwards name remains in the sort of public environment, even though when he spoke in his news conference, he sort of played dumb a little bit, sort of suggesting that he had found out about this possibility via his daughter. I'm not sure the exact veracity of that, because Wolves' interest in him, irrespective of his intentions, is credible. They think really highly of him. They've got a strong connection and many links between him and the club. And whether they do pursue that, there have been some reports from elsewhere sort of insinuating he might be the top target now. And no doubt they will look in other directions. We've seen in the past that there's been a strong Portuguese theme, which owes to their relationship with George Mendes and Gestafoot agency. And so, yeah, I suppose it was kind of back to the drawing board after the O'Neill situation, although, Wolves have been keen to impress on us that they were juggling many balls. There were multiple irons in fires. As of the time which we broke the O'Neill news, we weren't expecting an imminent solution. So they're clearly going to take a bit of time, despite wanting to resolve it sooner rather than later, in what's an absolutely crucial decision for the club and its Premier League status.
Tim, would Gary O'Neill have been a disaster if he came back to Wolves?
I mean, it's hard to say anything other than then yes, really. I mean, there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that might have been the case. You know, the fact that he left them in 19th a year ago, and Wolves were a bit of a shambles at the time and conceding a set-piece goal every 10 minutes. And, I mean, this just sort of, I'm amazed it's come to this. I thought, Wolves were sort of seen as a well-run model club a few years ago. To go from that sort of 4 or 5 years later to appointing a guy who was sacked for not being good enough a year ago, and the chairman publicly said on a podcast in July that they sacked O'Neill too late because he was doing such a bad job. So for him to say that in July and then a few months later to be trying to reappoint him makes no sense to me whatsoever. But it shows how desperate they are, and it shows how badly run they are at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that might be the theme of the podcast right there, how badly run Wolves are. But we'll come to Matt in just a second. Before that, let's just scoot back to Pereira, who left Wolves rock bottom in the league with 0 wins, Tim, 2 draws and 8 losses this season. How bad has the football been this season from a Wolves fan's perspective?
Do you know, we did this a year ago, I think, when O'Neill got sacked. I remember I remember calling it therapy at the time, and I think it's going to be something similar today. I mean, the tables, the Premier League tables are a bit weird at the moment, but it doesn't lie in Wolves' case. You know, it's most goals conceded, it's fewest goals scored, joint fewest goals scored. It's no wins in 10 for the second season in a row. You know, Wolves fans should just take their summer holidays until November, basically, because there's no point turning up for the first 10 matches. However, last year, people might remember they had an incredibly tough start to the season. I think something stupid like their first 10 games were against like the top 8 from the previous season. This year is really not as bad in terms of difficulty in theory. They've lost to Leeds, Burnley and Fulham, who are the teams that they're in theory trying to catch at the moment in 15th, 16th and 17th. But the football's been pretty bad. The XG numbers offer us sort of a slither of hope. They're like 18th in goals scored and 13th in goals against. So and that's better than Liverpool and Man United. So slightly better than things would suggest. But that's really clutching at straws. But the worst thing, Io, is like this is just no surprise whatsoever. The squad they've got is not good enough. And I'm sure we'll get into recruitment in a bit. But there's no creativity and the defence is really weak. So a lot of that is on Pereira, and a lot of individual players have been really struggling. I don't think he knows I don't think he knew his best 11 or formation. But the position that he was put in by the recruitment team and the ownership meant that being in a relegation battle was inevitable. Being rock bottom 20th, many points from safety is a slight surprise to me, but just not too much of a surprise at all. And yeah, the whole place is in a mess. Anti-ownership sentiments everywhere you look. Bottom of the table, and to top it off, Sam Allardyce said he wanted the job this morning. So I need to lie down, to be honest.
I'm sorry, Matt. I mean, we always like talking about how well run clubs are in general, or not.
Right.
In that case,
okay.
But I mean, I'm just looking as a business. You're offering someone a 3-year contract, whilst performances aren't that great. Wolves were rock bottom when they offered Pereira a 3-year contract. Obviously, they got rid of him 45 days after. Have you ever seen a situation like this before in lower league football, in Premier League football?
Look, I mean, short managerial spells are not new, right?
Yeah.
That goes all the way back to Brian Clough and Leeds, and Dave Bassett was at Palace, and Frank de Boer, he was definitely Palace. I mean, that's not new. And also the idea of sort of going back to exes. I mean, that happens all the time.
Sure.
I mean, my club, Southend, Dave Webb managed them 3 times and then went back a 4th time as assistant manager. I mean, this is an old story. They're giving him a contract. Okay, look, it looks dreadful now. But Tim, I didn't imagine this. He had a really good run, didn't he, in spring? Didn't they win?
Yeah.
6 in a row.
6 in a row. I'm sure I read last night that the first time a top flight team has ever won 6 in a row and then gone 14 without a win. It's never happened.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go.
All right, before ever.
Yeah. Okay. So that's like there in their memory that they were, at least for a period, he was getting a tune out of them. I definitely remember points then pints, and him drinking in Wetherspoons, and it all seeming quite positive. So that, I haven't imagined that, Tim. That definitely happened, didn't it?
It's a distant memory. You can see Tim just going,
but it feels distant. But that was this year, wasn't it? This calendar year.
Yeah. But I did text my friend in April who reminded me yesterday, saying, "Oh, he won't be popping in Wetherspoons after they've lost 3-0 to Burnley next season." It was 3-2, so I did get that slightly wrong, but still.
Okay. All right. Well, look. So I was just making some points for the defence.
Yeah.
That we have seen strange decisions before, short managerial spells. That's not new. Going back to people even if you know that the relationship was possibly not great, that's not new. Tim's points about desperation, yes. Being poorly run, yes, absolutely obvious, and I will definitely be talking about that a bit more. I don't think, of all the things that have gone wrong, giving Pereira a big contract 45 days ago, it looks dreadful with hindsight. 3 years, possibly unwise. I don't know all the detail of the contract. I wonder if it really was 3 years. That is probably a bit daft. You should always maybe incentivize these things and give yourself a get-out clause. Who really is doing 3 years these days? Again, Tim, I'm going to have to go to you. Is it 5 or 6 managers now in 4 years at Wolves?
They're looking for their 5th since 2021.
Well, okay, right. So look, the evidence isn't great, but I think there are bigger issues at Wolves than backing Pereira at the wrong time in terms of, length of contract. Did they back him in the transfer market? Did they back him very well in the transfer market? What is their plan at Molineux? Are they for sale, yes or no? There are so many issues to do with the ownership that I just think this particular call is a bad one, but it's one of 10 bad ones.
Well, let's talk about that. Backing him in transfers, Tim. £100 million spent on players without Premier League experience, and much has been made of this through football commentary. And I've been listening to a lot of it, going, "But these guys have never been tested. They don't even know who they're buying." Fans are saying the same thing. It's not a lot to work with financially, but were they the right buys?
No, and it's not just saying it after the fact. I think we all thought they'd had a poor summer. Basically, last season's squad wasn't good enough for a sort of a top 10 push, which is in theory what they should be aiming for. So you take that base level and you take away Cunha, who went to Man United. You take away Akinwolere to Man City. You take away club captain Nelson Semedo, who went to Turkey on a Bosman. Even Pablo Sarabia, who was a creative presence mostly off the bench. Now, this is nothing new at Wolves. They've been losing good players for many years. People have seen the likes of Neto, Neves, Moutinho, Jimenez, Mateus Nunes, Adama Traore, even Nathan Collins, who went to Brentford, which looks like a ridiculous sale in hindsight. All these players have gone in sort of the past 2-3 years. But the problem this summer and in a few recent windows is that the recruitment has just been utterly woeful. They knew in June that all the aforementioned players were leaving. Cunha and Akinwolere went before the Club World Cup, and Semedo was a free and Sarabia was a free. So they knew that, and yet we're all waiting so long for them to bring players in. They were basically missing out on targets and going down to like 4th, 5th choices. So they ended up getting players just to fill gaps in the squad. The perfect example of how the recruitment has gone this summer would be Mateus Cunha leaving, by far and away their best player. And his replacement is John Arias, who, yes, is an exciting, Colombian winger. But he's 27 years old. He's not a young player. He's been passed up by a lot of clubs across Europe over the years. He had a good Club World Cup with Fluminense and is a sort of a creative, dynamic, wide player. But his career in Brazil hasn't produced anything like the sort of end product he would need to match Cunha, let alone in the Premier League. And lo and behold, he struggled to adapt his first time in Europe, and it's 10 games, no goals, no assists. And he's Cunha's replacement. The wing-backs that came in to replace Akinwolere and Semedo have both been dropped already. The left-back they got, Muller Wolf, the Norway's left-back, looks completely out of his depth. And like you say, not a single addition has Premier League experience. I find it maddening, to be honest. Their other creative addition was Fer Lopez, a 19-year-old attacking midfielder from Celta Vigo, who looks nice enough, but he started 6 league games in his whole career. So to ask him to come in and make an impact week after week in the Premier League is far too much. You compare that, and you mentioned about not a lot of money to play with. I'm not sure about that. If you look at Sunderland and what they've done with the money that they've spent, which isn't dissimilar to Wolves in terms of the amount. They've gone for young but experienced players, ready-made for the Premier League, they certainly look like, ready-made for the style of football that Sunderland play, similar prices to what Wolves are paying, but they got a lot of their business done early, and Wolves have no plan for this. They haven't got a sort of a Brighton or Brentford or Sporting or Sunderland, type philosophy in terms of recruitment. They've changed sporting directors almost as much as head coaches in the last few years, which is a huge problem. So when you have all that chopping and changing, but you don't have a sort of a consistent plan or a mantra throughout the club in terms of recruitment or playing style, you're basically going from window to window, hoping to sort of cobble a team together. And that's, we talk about Pereira, but that's all on Fosun and Jeff Shee, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you're right. I was watching Sunderland last night. You look at Granit Xhaka, obviously Premier League experience. Traore, who was at Aston Villa, actually, Premier League experience again. So you're looking at players who know what it takes to play at this level. And obviously with the right coaching, we are obviously seeing the fruits of that. Who knows where Sunderland would end up, but they're in a way better position, clearly, than Wolves. Matt, let's talk about the ownership, your specialist subject.
I know nothing about Wolves players, I'm afraid.
But this is what we've got.
I've seen my match of the day and I didn't recognise any of them.
Can you give us a brief history then on Fosun's tenure at Wolves?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So they bought the club from Steve Morgan, Scouser, about 45 million in 2016. And that year is important. It was around 15-16. That was the peak of the Chinese football boom. So President Xi had decided that he really, really wanted to grow China's domestic, but also kind of global sports industry. And they were going to invest massively at home in their own league, Chinese Super League, but they were also going to learn from abroad. They were going to, put themselves out there on the world. They were going to hopefully maybe stage a World Cup at some point. They were going to do well in their home World Cup, just as they had done well in their home Olympics in 2008. There was going to be a big push behind football, okay? And it didn't last very long. And it was spectacularly unsuccessful. So the Chinese Super League was a massive kind of boom and bust. They threw money at lots of Brazilian players and sort of high-earning managers. None of it really stuck. Their national team's pretty hopeless. Their women's team was decent sort of 20 odd years ago. Their men's team have never been good and still not very good. They just haven't cracked football. And President Xi kind of moves on. The Chinese Communist Party moves on. This is even before we get to COVID, where lots of strange things happen. So the Chinese football boom was over very quickly, almost before it kind of became a thing. But lots and lots of Chinese business people, companies, but also kind of individuals, kind of took the directive from the top and all went off and bought clubs all over Europe and a lot in England. And nearly all of those were disasters because they weren't rich enough. Most of them had no clue what they were doing. They were all absentee landlords. They all got kind of fleeced themselves by advisors and agents, and so many stories. Reading and Wigan, and they're just hundreds of them. Birmingham City, Aston Villa, and they nearly all end in tears. Wolves are the exception in so many ways. One, they're still standing. They're the last. Two, Fosun are a proper company. They're quite an unusual company. They're a massive conglomerate, healthcare, retail, property. They own like strange bits of companies like Club Med, Lanvin, which is this massive sort of French luxury brand. They make a lot of drugs, a big sort of pharmaceutical business. They Silver Cross. I had a Silver Cross pram at one point. There's lots of sort of strange things they do. And Wolves. And also for a time, Grasshopper, this team in Switzerland, when they kind of were doing all the things that kind of proper owners, well, not proper owners, but they were kind of like buying into all the theories, multi-club. And okay, first few years, they bought them in the Championship, sort of mid-table, kind of typical sort of sleeping giant type story. We want to get back to the Premier League. First couple of years, not really a great deal happening. And then bang, I think it was 2018, Tim, just nod if I've got that year right. They win the Championship playing really good stuff. He's nodded. Good. I did remember that. Now, their USP, and this is where I think we have to acknowledge that they got one thing right, very importantly at the beginning, they picked the right advisor. Okay, so like a lot of those disastrous Chinese owners who picked cowboys and charlatans and crooks, they picked Jorge Mendes. And Jorge Mendes gave them amazing access to his stable of largely Portuguese talent. From managers, his very first client, Nuno Espirito Santo, all the way through to Ruben Neves and João Moutinho and loads of players that, I'm going to possibly be rude here, a club of Wolves stature at that moment possibly were overreaching. Oh, wow. Sorry, Ruben Neves is playing for who now? Okay, let's see how this plays out. It went really well. So first in the Championship, became 7th in the Premier League. So an amazing 3-year run with really good players. That second 7th season, they also went to the quarterfinals of the Europa League.
Yeah.
Right, so 3 really good years, 18 through to 20.
Yeah, super quickly on the Mendes conversation. I know January's not far off and we're looking at Jorge Mendes and how influential he was in terms of recruitment, especially of players in particular. Who's in charge of that right now?
It's always a bit of an unclear picture at Wolves because there are different people doing different things. You've got Fosun as ownership. You've got Mendes and Gestafoot who have had a strong influence on matters there. You've had a sporting director previously in the form of Matt Hobbs, who was regarded as doing a pretty good job in working with sort of Mendes, Gestafoot, but also independently on behalf of Wolves and getting some pretty impressive work done. After Pereira was appointed, Domenico Tetti arrived as Director of Professional Football, I think was his title. And he was closely linked to Pereira because they'd worked together before, I think, in Saudi Arabia, which is always quite contentious, a manager being involved or a head coach being involved in the appointment of a sporting director, technical director, or in his case, Director of Professional Football. The feeling is always that it should be a club appointment. I think Wolves have tried to suggest in recent days in the media that he was a club appointment, is a club appointment, and will be staying. I've heard different noises from around the industry that at the very least there's uncertainty about his future now, which would inevitably create some significant stability, given that he was involved, of course, in summer recruitment. So would have been Jeff Shee as the chairman and closely involved on a day-to-day basis. There's Matt Jackson, who joined the club in, I think, 2021, and he's got the job of Director of Player Recruitment and Development. So that's somebody who's involved in all of this. And then you've got people like Director of Performance, Phil Hayward, Director of Football Operations and Administration, Matt Wild. So there are other people in the mix, but I guess we're going to have to receive some clarity on what's happening around Tetti. And then exactly what role Mendes Gestafoot play going forward, we'll have to wait and see. You would assume it is strong given what we've seen in the past. And then, of course, Matt Jackson there on behalf of the club as well. So a lot to sort out.
Well, let's leave it there. Gents, I really appreciate your time, Matt, Tim, and also David. And also thank you guys for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.